There's something specific that brought you to this video. Not the title, not the algorithm. Something older than that. Something in you that has been quietly paying attention, even in the seasons when you were too exhausted to notice. You don't arrive at a message like this by accident. The part of you that needed to hear this found it. So if you have somewhere else to be right now, go. Come back when you don't. But if you can give me the next few minutes undivided, just you and this space, I want to show you something about yourself that most people will live their whole lives and never fully understand. Not what you're capable of. You already have some sense of that. I want to show you what was built in you without your full awareness, without your permission, in the seasons you didn't choose, through circumstances you didn't design, in the silence no one else was present for. This is not motivation. This is not a list. This is a mirror. And what it reflects, if you're ready to look without flinching, is something measurably rare. Stay with me. There is a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. It describes something the scientific community overlooked for a long time, that some people don't just recover from adversity, they expand because of the specific way they move through it. And that detail matters, because suffering alone does not produce growth. Pain without the right internal conditions produces damage, contraction, armor that slowly becomes a prison, defensive patterns that calcify into bitterness, numbness, or a quiet shrinking that looks fine from the outside and costs everything on the inside. What determines the outcome is not the weight of what happened to you, it's the internal orientation you brought to carrying it. Somewhere in your past, in a season that was long, dark, and isolating, you made a choice. It may not have felt like a choice. It may have felt like survival. But beneath that survival, something rare was happening. You turned inward instead of outward. When the pain became too heavy to carry openly and too complicated to explain, you didn't discharge it into the people nearest to you. You didn't drown it in distraction or anesthetize it into numbness. You sat with it, often alone, often in the kind of quiet that has no comfortable name. You let it be what it was. You allowed it to be informative instead of only devastating. Many people never do that even once. You did it repeatedly, often unconsciously, often at real personal cost, often with no evidence it was leading anywhere worth going. And that private habit, reflection over reaction, began to rebuild you from the inside out in ways that are only now becoming visible. Let me be precise about what you are actually navigating. It wasn't just circumstances. It wasn't simply hard seasons, difficult people, or bad luck. Those were the surface. Beneath the surface were patterns, long-running behavioral and emotional patterns that existed before you arrived, patterns that compress potential, patterns that teach people to become smaller, patterns that make familiar pain feel safer than the unfamiliar discomfort of real change. Family systems theory calls this multi-generational transmission, the unconscious transfer of emotional patterns and unresolved wounds from one generation to the next. What remains unprocessed in one generation tends to surface in the next, wearing a different face but carrying the same emotional core. You weren't only dealing with your own weight. In many ways, You were inheriting residue from people who didn't have the resources, or the safety, or the awareness to do what you eventually did with it. And then there were the internal forces, the early narratives running quietly beneath everything. You don't belong here. You're too much. You're not enough. Nothing good holds. Don't trust the calm. Make yourself smaller. Take up less space. These aren't character defects. They're predictable survival adaptations. Patterns a nervous system builds when it learns the world isn't consistently safe. They were sophisticated, effective at their original job. They just outlived the conditions that created them. What you were navigating, the self-doubt, the isolation, the pull of cycles trying to rebuild themselves, the pressure that knew how to wait you out, was real. It was structural. It was designed to perpetuate itself. And you moved through it anyway. Not without stumbling, not without cost, but with something hard to name without diminishing it. An integrity of self that refused, even under sustained pressure, to fully dissolve into what it was being shaped to become. Here is where the science becomes remarkable. The human brain is neuroplastic. It rewires itself in response to experience, and in response to how a person processes experience. Every time you chose reflection over reaction, you laid down new architecture. Every time you returned to yourself after an old pattern pulled you away, you strengthened a new pathway. Every time you stayed in discomfort long enough to understand it rather than escape it, you built capacity. This is self-directed neuroplasticity, the deliberate restructuring of mental and emotional patterns through focused attention and repeated choices. You are doing this without knowing it had a name. And there is another capacity you built, maybe the rarest one: emotional transmutation. Not mystical, psychological, precise. The capacity to take the raw material of painful experience, grief, rejection, betrayal, long seasons that demanded more than they offered, and instead of suppressing it into numbness or discharging it into others, to metabolize it. Most people do one of two things with pain. They suppress it, and it hardens into bitterness and rigidity. Or they discharge it, and it spills into relationships, parenting, daily interactions, perpetuating the same cycle that created the wound. But there's a third option: to metabolize, to feel it fully, understand it contextually, trace it to its origin, extract what it has to teach, release what does not belong to you anymore, and convert the residue into clarity. Metabolizing pain is not passive. It is not gentle. It is one of the most demanding processes available to human consciousness. And over time, it produces something people can sense immediately. A quality, a presence that doesn't perform. A nervous system recalibrated under real pressure. A precision, a steadiness. The emotional regulation you carry now, the ability to read a room without being absorbed by it, to feel without becoming the feeling, to hold two contradictory truths without collapsing into either. That wasn't given to you. It was built, and it belongs to you completely. This is why people don't quite know how to categorize you anymore. They watched you go through seasons where you went quiet, withdrew into your own process, and looked uncertain on the surface. They made their assessments, Some wrote you off, mistaking internal reconstruction for stagnation. And then something shifted. Not dramatically, not with announcement, but enough that people began, involuntarily, to revise their conclusions. You came back clearer, not louder, not more defended, not performing recovery for an audience, just steadier. What they're responding to has a name: behavioral consistency under adversity. Not consistency because nothing is hard, consistency because the difficulty has been integrated, because you can hold yourself through the storm without requiring the storm to stop before you function. To people who haven't done the same work, this is disorienting. They saw the before, they see the after. The middle, the valley, the private labor of becoming was yours alone. So what they see now looks like something that shouldn't be survivable in this way. But what happened is simpler and harder than any story they can tell. You did the work, quietly, without guarantee, without a map, without anyone to confirm the direction. And now, it shows in the only place real transformation ever shows, in the texture of how you show up. One more thing before we close. When you chose to metabolize the pain instead of pass it forward, you didn't only heal yourself, you interrupted a pattern. Unprocessed emotional experience moves through families across generations, through nervous system co-regulation, through relational dynamics, through the unconscious modeling of how to relate to pain, safety, and self-worth. Every generation that carries it forward extends the pattern, and every person who stops, who holds still long enough to examine what they're carrying, trace it to its origin, and metabolize it rather than transmit it, bends the trajectory of what comes after them. You are that person, not because you are exempt from the work, because you did the work when you had every reason not to. When passing the weight forward would have been easier, familiar, socially invisible, and understandable, you chose something harder, quieter, more costly, with no audience, no monument, no external confirmation. The absence of recognition does not reduce its significance. What you stopped, stops at you. And what grows in the space where it used to live will be different because of choices you made, often in the dark, often without fully understanding what you were doing. Let me close with precision. The regulation, the clarity, the capacity to transmute rather than transfer did not arrive passively. They are the accumulated outcome of choices made in the most disorienting seasons of your life. You kept processing when shutting down was available. You stayed curious when numbness was easier. You chose repeatedly to grow instead of harden. That is the architecture. Own it. Not with arrogance, with precision, with the kind of self-recognition that doesn't need to perform to be real. And understand this, what you built requires maintenance. The people who sustain it are the ones who remain in honest relationship with the process, who continue to examine their patterns, stay truthful about blind spots, and treat self-awareness as a discipline they return to. But today, in this moment, let yourself see what you have become, not what you're building toward, not what you once were, what you are right now, as a direct result of the valley you walked through and the specific way you chose to walk through it. What people see in you is not a mystery. It's the visible output of invisible work. It's the face of someone who encountered pressure that either breaks or refines, and who chose refinement. That is who you are. The question now is not whether you are capable. That evidence is already present. The question is what you choose to build next, with everything the valley gave you, in the direction only you can choose. That question has no answer yet. It's waiting for you to write it. Take a breath before you move to the next thing. This kind of conversation needs space to settle. If something in this landed for you, share it with one person you know is still inside their valley. Not as a promise, but as evidence of what is possible. This is the inner calling. I'll see you in the next one.